Hi everyone. So thanks for joining us for our latest Together for Business event. We are expecting a few more that have registered, so we'll just keep the room open. So apologies if we have to let anyone in late. But for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Damon Scott. I'm the Chief Executive of Dunbartonshire Chamber of Commerce, and as I said, this is part of our Together for Business activity that came about as part of as a response to the crisis. We've shifted from a lot of the business support that we were offering in terms of information and expert advice on all the sorts of HR, furloughing, grants, and financial support. Which we still do sort of surgeries once a week to deal with that, but we're moving to the what we call the re-emerging economy. Just announced, the first sort of phase of lifting of the sort of restrictions for businesses, and so it's a really key time to sort of connect with businesses and let them know what's happening at this time, and get them to think about what they need to do, how they need to prepare, and to make a wee bit of sense of what the I think it was 40 odd pages, if I seem to remember, that got issued there. So just making a bit of sense of that for businesses, and to make sure they're not on their own dealing with this, and they can actually connect with some experts in this field. So I'm delighted to say we've got John Gillespie of Peninsula and then Bown of People at Work, and we'll be covering, sort of, John will be doing an update on the latest announcements and guidance, and Anne will talk a bit about absenteeism and probably an emerging issue for businesses during this time that she's been dealing with. So we'll have a question and answer session after the guys have spoken, and I can host that. There's if people aren't familiar, there's a chat function. You can go in there and post your chats and questions if you need to, and you can put, there's a virtual hand that you can put up, but we will look out for real hands up in the screen as well. So I think that's the housekeeping and what have you. So I think if I could pass over to John to lift the lid on some of the latest developments, please.
Thanks, Damon, and good afternoon, everyone. My name John Gillespie from Peninsula Business Services. Peninsula are a UK-based consultancy company that specialises predominantly in two areas: HR, employment law, and health and safety. And we've been active now since 1983, and we look after, probably our CV will say, we look after roughly about 37,000 clients. Predominantly, typically, but not exactly, sort of companies that sit around about the 20, 25, maybe slightly less, and sometimes more, organisations who, for a variety of reasons, perhaps don't have the time or the energy, even the inclination to try and keep on top of this, because they're so focused on just trying to drive all the other dynamics within their business. But by virtue of that same fact, they have to ensure that they are compliant and managing to keep a pace with all the vagaries of the legislation, and try and keep on top of managing staff effectively and managing health and safety. And that can throw up its challenges, as I'm sure people around the room will agree. And not least of which has been the period that we've been in for the last three months. My own background, I started with Peninsula back in 1993. I've seen a lot of change. I've seen a lot of challenges. I've seen a lot of positive aspects to our SME client base as they grow and develop their business, but nothing that has been as intense over these last 10, 11 weeks. And we are very much that sort of age-old phrase, finger on the pulse, because that's what we have to do. We have to advise our clients, ensuring that they're kind of staying, I don't want to use the word the curve because it's used in other places, but making sure they're keeping ahead of and abreast of the legislation and what it means to their business and how they adapt. And also to anticipate forthcoming changes and perhaps areas that Anne will maybe touch on when she comes to talk about HR as we all slowly start to climb out of the current situation. So COVID-19 is the phrase, furlough is a phrase, coronavirus is the phrase. And what I've seen, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, going back to the mid-end of March and certainly through April, we were very much entrenched in advising on furlough process and what furlough meant and what the implications were, and the coronavirus job retention scheme and furloughing staff and changing terms and how people could be laid off and the application for relief through the process. And we're kind of working through that process now, and we're listening to the updates from the Chancellor. And Friday of last week was quite a significant announcement date, because on that date he mentioned that there would be the lifting and changing of restrictions from the 1st of July, where there could be partial return to work. And from August through September, and ultimately till its end in October, a reduction in the benefit through the job retention scheme. But all the while, and as I said in one of the previous webinars, furlough was introduced, but it hasn't set aside current UK employment legislation. All the rules still apply, and therefore as employers, we have to be very cognizant that we're following all the requirements set down in employment law to ensure that we're managing fairly, we're reacting fairly, we're not in breach, and we're not discriminating, because furlough is an extension, it's not a replacement for. So again, a further complication and a difficulty, I'd say, for the vast majority of especially the sphere that we deal in, business owners. So it's looking at that, and also talking to business owners about how they anticipate coming out of this. I think I mentioned this before, that a lot of businesses will probably, the marketplace, the client base, will perhaps bear no resemblance to the type of organisation where they went in, so looking at that as well. But I think over the last couple of weeks, our attention has pivoted quite significantly, whilst we are still advising on HR and the requirements around about making sure there are good measures and controls in place. I think over the last couple of weeks, our attention has pivoted towards health and safety, as especially those clients that we deal with south of the border, who are ahead of us in the process, but as organisations consider or start to make preparation for returning to work, or the lifting of the restrictions, or the phased return or soft return, because the government, and through the arm of the Health and Safety Executive, have been very, very clear and have in fact issued very, very strong and clear guidelines. The Health and Safety Executive latest document runs to some 33 pages, and it is a requirement for all employers to ensure that they're following the new COVID-19 regulations, because what underpins this is that the government want to kickstart or restart the economy, but it's got to be with conditions that safety is absolutely paramount, to avoid, as you would expect, the genuine concerns about a second wave or a further spike. So it's important that any business owner that we're speaking to, I'm speaking to, or those in the room today that are perhaps thinking about getting some sort of preparatory process, that they must ensure that they are complying with the regulations as they stand. So general stuff that we've all been familiar with about sanitisation, preparing for social distancing in the workplace, looking at staggered shift patterns, looking at morning and afternoon work. All these factors have to be taken into account. But there's lots of other factors, and perhaps we can talk about these, and happy to share these. That there'll be lots of, for instance, I'm talking to a business this morning where their factory and office has been closed now for the best part of 10 weeks. So what they want to consider when they go back in. They'll need to have to look at the fire assessment, the fire control procedures. They'll need to look at the heating and venting procedures. There's some water involved in the running through the factories, so they'll need to look at the running of the water process. So if there's been standing water, to ensure that they are meeting any requirements under Legionella. So it's kind of a kind of wider concept thought here as organisations start to think about getting back to work, and from the physical layout of their operation as well. What has been driven by our own First Minister is that where possible, still the go-to place is that staff work from home. That is still the desired choice. And I think as I look around the room today, I think everyone is working in that manner. Yeah. So, but in order to try and put some sort of process in place, the government, the First Minister, the Scottish Government issued on the 21st of May the roadmap that perhaps everyone in the room, those in the room, have had a chance to have a look at it. But it's kind of setting out how our government, the Scottish Government, see this phased and then ultimately a complete return to work. But this will all be guided by reports and reviews and feedback from public health officers and from ministers who are in a position to control these measures. So broken into 4 phases, very simply, and phase 1 came into effect from Thursday of last week. So very much open air style concept. So from a social aspect, I don't know if anyone's a golfer, I'm not, but from Thursday of last week, you could rattle sticks down at the golf course. Garden centres could reopen. Public recycling centres, which is really good for my shed because it's absolutely creaking at the moment. So as you can see, the kind of concept there that these types of operations that we're reopening can naturally lending themselves to a more risk-averse type situation. However, in the golf club, in the recycling centre, these organisations still have to ensure that they have complied with the new regulations, that staff are fully familiar and up to date with their responsibility, that managers are up to date with their responsibilities, and all the controls and measures are in place to ensure that the risk is minimised as greatly as possible. And the idea is that along the roadmap that it will be sort of 3-weekly milestones upon which these review processes will take place. And phase 2 then we anticipate possibly sometime around about the beginning of July, we'll be looking at non-essential indoor and non-office based again, and that would take into account factories and warehouses and labs and research facilities as well. So knowing the area that we operate here in and around West Central Scotland and around Dumbartonshire, that will probably encapsulate a lot of businesses in and around the trading estates where they are looking to get back to work. But again, before that takes place, again, going back to the earlier points, these organisations and business owners will have to ensure that they've carried out and got in place the correct measures and controls, and everything, absolutely everything, is documented as well. Now, I was talking to a factory owner this morning, and he said, "What about like canteen and restroom?" I said, "Absolutely, it has to stay locked." I said, "And staff making cups of tea for each other." I said, "It sounds silly," I said, "but these things are going to have to really be taken into account." I said, "Maybe the tea boy or tea girl will get a rest now." I said, "That's not so bad." And construction industry, which is one of the main component industries in society, will now consider around about phase 2 to look at its own phased return, because by getting construction back online, then it's all the other associated industries that feed into that as well. Phase 3, then, assuming that everything is still running smooth and that we keep on top of the R number and that the curve we're managing to keep flat, we'll then look at non-essential indoor office workplaces can open, again, once they've agreed and met the relevant compliance guidelines. and again, making sure that they comply with physical distancing. And then ultimately phase 4, which we anticipate somewhere around about maybe end of August, perhaps beginning of September, is the more flexible route where all workplaces can open, and that would be offices. But again, by that stage, perhaps there will be a relaxation. Someone said the other day the 2 metre rule might go down to a rule. We're kind of just clutching about in the dark here. We don't know. Let's not anticipate what we think the legislation might say. Let's deal with the legislation just now. Because the sting in the tail is that the Health and Safety Executive have been given an additional £15 million in funds in order to bolster the enforcement process. So there is always the likelihood that the Health and Safety Executive may just take the opportunity to wander into a trading estate, down a high street, into an office department, and will call on doors and will ask the questions and will ask to see the relevant documents. And failure to produce or evidence that perhaps leaves employers in a difficult situation to try and argue their point. Staff have to feel safe as well. We've already had something like 9,500 whistleblowing calls to the Health and Safety Executive line for employees who feel that they're not safe. Now, there's a school of thought that those calls, the spike in those calls coincidentally or coincided with the spike in the fine weather that we had and people were expected to return to work. I don't know, that might just be the cynic in me as well, but there is a whistleblowing process available. Employees, and Anne will probably touch on this, and I may come in as well, that if employees don't feel safe, and they have to feel safe, they have to be given adequate information, they have to be given adequate training, and they have to feel safe. And that if they don't, then they afford themselves the opportunity to perhaps raise arguments and claims which ultimately could lead to breach of contract and then ultimately constructive dismissal. So there is a correlation there between health and safety and employment law, as it always does. So there is a roadmap, but it has to be viewed with caution, and it has to be embarked on with caution as well. And as I say, because I'm probably in this position, that if business owners are going to try and go ahead on this on their own, they need to be dead sure they know what they're doing, because for this, they need to take advice from a competent person or a competent advisor or someone who understands the implications and is able to help them with the applications. I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, Damon.
No, that's good. I think we'll probably move on to Anne and then sort of take questions at the end, just so we can keep a bit of momentum on this. But thank you very much. I think sort of some good, clear sort of highlights there from the document that was presented. And I think you're right in terms of don't take anything for granted. But I guess the only thing I'd like to instill in people's minds is assume all the measures that are going to be required, but don't leave it to the last minute is probably one of the big messages. So planning for where you think you're in that phased process and where you think your customers and staff are in that phased process, being prepared, ready for it is probably going to be a crucial element of getting back to business as soon as possible. So thanks for that, John. So thanks, Anne. So if we could move on to you now, because I know you've been having some themes developing, I think, recently around sort of absenteeism, and it's probably not something that's been right at the fore actually in the conversation. So I think it's a really useful area to focus on for people who have got employees.
Yeah. So hello everybody, I am Anne Bown and I'm a self-employed HR consultant. So I've been in business for trading for about a year now, and I tend to deal with small, micro and small small companies. And what I thought is, moving forward, there's going to be lots of ways that perhaps people can get into trouble with the current coronavirus crisis, because there's, you know, as John said, you've got to comply with all the current law, and then we have the added complications of the pandemic and what that means for employment. So what I'm going to do just now is I'm going to try and share my a presentation I've made up for you. So I'm just going to try that now.
Okay, give you a couple of seconds to get that sorted, Anne. And this is the first time she's done a screen sharing, so
Yeah,
we'll just give her a wee second with
yes, so where am I?
that.
So share screen. That one. Here we go.
Perfect.
Right, so I just wondered if of the participants that are here, is there anyone involved in managing absence within the group? Is that something that people do on a regular basis? No, I'm sorry, but I can't see everyone's boxes, faces, screens.
All right. No problem.
Right, okay, so I'll just carry on then. I was hoping to maybe get a bit of interaction going, but I don't know if we'll be able to do that. So, so what the purpose of the presentation today then was just to look at...
Sorry, Anne, sorry to interrupt. Could you just maximise that? Just play it from the beginning so it's got a bit more of some extra size for the slides. That's perfect. If you can scoot back to the...
So I need to go, sorry, no. I'm going to pause that a minute. I need to go back. Right, I'm going to stop and go back. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, while we're doing that, Natasha, you've got employees, haven't you? So you'll be having to deal with...
My husband and I are owners of a building, basically a roofing and cladding company, and we manage our staff. So we manage all the staff, and also manage staff which are CIS and the subcontractors, the surveillance building sites.
How many employees have you got that you might need to sort of deal with sort of absenteeism?
Managing absences, is that going to be direct staff, as in, you know, PAYE, or is it through you know, sites where they are subcontracting, self-employed?
I guess it would be direct, sort of. Anne, what's...
Well, yeah, it would be mainly for employees, but it does affect workers as well.
Right, great.
Yeah, yeah. So I am just about to try. Can you see the slide now?
No.
No, I think you just need to share again. Share your screen.
Oh, for goodness sake. Sorry, guys. Right. So, from the beginning.
Just while we're doing it, sorry, Laura, just wondering, in terms of get a bit of input in terms of your background and involvement. Sorry, look, Laura's. I think no, unfortunately, your mic's not working. We're having lots of technical difficulties at the moment. So
yeah, sorry, I'm such a novice. I'm embarrassed.
All right.
Right, so I'm just trying again.
Is that better? Could you?
Oh, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. So I was recommended to join in by our human resources.
Okay.
I am based in London.
Okay.
And we work. We've got a post-production company, so working in films and TV.
Oh, okay.
And so I guess we've got a slightly different setup because we have been working for the past 2 months, more or less. So we've kind of tried to stay on top of kind of safety within the workplace for our staff and a few clients. I mean, we normally have about 140 people on site. Now we have maybe 10 to 15. So we've been able to kind of look at social distancing and looking at all those elements, but we're trying to get a better understanding of going forward, how this crisis is going to affect our staff and how to kind of anticipate as much as possible.
How many, are they all direct employees or subcontractors?
Yes, they are. So we have both, but most of them, the majority, are direct employees.
Okay, cool. Right. Okay, that's useful to get that background from you guys, and we'll get some questions at the end where you can sort of ask specific questions to John and Anne. Okay. Right, Anne, do you want to start that slide again?
Okay, so I wanted to just, the purpose of the presentation was really just to provide people of an understanding of the different types of absence that are recorded, to maybe have a look at the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on the workforce, provide people with a reminder of the employment law framework surrounding the management of absence due to COVID-19, and then actually managing absence, particularly for the micro employers. Do they actually have a policy that they're going to be able to follow? And then just talk through holding a meeting with employees to discuss any absence due to illness, and then just some of their questions at the end.
And sorry to interrupt, can you hit F5 on your keyboard and we'll start playing the slideshow?
F5. Yeah, I did that. Is it working?
No, you're still just, is that okay, Damon? Do you want it like that, or would you prefer it full screen? If you hit from the top left from beginning.
There we go.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay, so just to talk about different leave and types of absence. So annual leave, as everyone knows, 28 days, including public and bank holidays. In terms of COVID-19 and the impact of that, you can carry annual leave over for the next 2 annual leave years, if that's something that you want to do. The type of absence that attracts statutory payments, I just wanted to point them out: maternity, paternity, the types of leave that people get a payment for. What might have to happen when you're trying to manoeuvre with the levels of absence due to coronavirus, some people might be looking to their entitlements, the family-friendly leave, parental leave, or time off to care for dependents. Now, I've included a link there for ACAS, so you can have a look and remind yourselves of what that actually is again. But basically, it's time off, unpaid. You might have a situation in the future where someone's maybe exhausted their sick pay. They don't have any sick pay left. How else are you going to classify that absence? And then absence due to other illness that isn't coronavirus related as well, you're going to have to include that. Now, the absence due to coronavirus might attract contractual sick pay, or alternatively statutory sick pay. You also have unauthorised absences. You might find that people don't show up one day and they might have a good reason for that, and it's something you're maybe going to have to take on board. And then the other types of absence: time off for antenatal care, time off to deal with trade union activities, educational qualifications, etc. Discipline and grievance procedures. So all the other types of absences, depending on the size of your company, you might be classifying all these types of absence, or you might not, but it's a good idea to try and classify it and have codes for it. So if you look at what the impact is going to be on the workforce, it's going to have a huge impact. It's having a huge impact. We've got people worried about job security, coping with conflicting demands. They maybe be working at home, but they've got children in the home as well. How are they going to travel to and from work? Is that a risk that you should be assessing? Parental responsibilities, emotional well-being, there'll be a level of stress involved. So there are probably, these are reasons for absence that happen every day. But in terms of COVID-19, it may well be that there's, you know, there is likely to be an upsurge in the sort of problems that people are having with, and what companies are going to have to prepare to deal with. And then, as John touched on earlier, you know, the probably moving forward and getting back into the workplace, Health and Safety at Work Act and the subsequent updates are going to be, you know, they are just going to be of such focus that employers are going to have to make sure they're well prepared. And as John referred to, the legislation, the code of practice, that people should really be reading up in that, and probably in Scotland, because we're a bit behind. You'll have time to maybe read up on it, maybe. So the other thing's the Equality Act then, so you should be making sure that no one is suffering from any detriment because of race, age, sex, etc. Employment Rights Act. We've also got the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, and at the bottom there I'd pointed out ACAS guidance for managing attendance and employee turnover. And in amongst everything else, you might also have to observe ACAS code of practice on discipline and grievance procedures too, possibly related to absence. Okay. So from that, I thought we'd have a look at the test, trace and isolate and support strategy for Scotland at the minute. And this is to try and help you prepare and think about what's going to be happening over the coming months, and depending on how long COVID-19 is around for. For instance, the British government has named, sort of branded the strategy as working safely during COVID-19. So the focus really is that we have to work safely during COVID-19, and we don't know how long that's going to be for. So within Scotland, people are being asked if they experience symptoms, they've got to isolate, they've got to telephone the NHS on their GP first of all. They can't get to the GP, then the NHS 111 on the out of hours line. Then they begin a process to identify close contacts. So for instance, if the test results negative, there's no need to do that. But if the results are positive, then close contacts will be contacted and asked to self-isolate. So, you know, again, in terms of your workforce and absence, it might not, you know, we're at this gauge, as we said, where we don't know what's going to happen. It might not have any impact at all, or it could have quite a big impact. And one of the risks then for companies would be, how's that going to affect your workplace? So for instance, if you don't ensure that your staff maintain a 2 metre distance from each other at all times, then you're probably looking at maybe people in the, for instance, if you've got a group of office workers and they're not maintaining the 2 metre distance from each other, then potentially you could have all of your workers off, self-isolating. So I know that's an absolutely extreme example, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And I just wanted to point that out and let people think about it. And really the importance then really is to make sure that you enforce the social distancing rules at work. So from there, I thought we'd look at the coronavirus SSP rebate scheme. So it's now open for applications, and the scheme will pay up to 2 weeks sick pay if the absence is related to coronavirus outbreak. So ideally, if someone is asked to self-isolate, they'd be asked to work from home. But if they can't work from home, they would be entitled to contractual sick pay. So whatever's in the contract then is what they'd be entitled to. Companies however, won't be entitled to reclaim the contractual sick pay. They'll only be entitled to claim the SSP element of that. And for those who receive statutory sick pay, you can offer an alternative, such as them using annual leave. So for instance, if statutory sick pay is a third of what they would normally get paid, then you'd be wanting to maybe offer annual leave instead so that they don't suffer a huge detriment. So as I said, NHS Scotland is managing the whole test, trace, isolate and support strategy, and some of the symptoms, they must contact their GP, and if out of hours, contact NHS on the telephone. And for further guidance on the SSP rebate scheme, I've put a link in there for you. But a wee bit more about the COVID-19 and self-isolating. So people, if they're asked to self-isolate, they'll be given an isolation note to prove that they've been told to self-isolate because of coronavirus and can't go to work. So isolation notes, again, they're for people who have symptoms of the virus, live with someone who has symptoms, or have been told to self-isolate by a test and trace service. So if you need evidence that an employee can't work because of coronavirus, you should ask them to get the self-isolation note. Now, they're issued by the NHS. They're not issued by a GP, so the person shouldn't be calling GP asking for the isolation note. It must come from the NHS. And I believe that's probably to not overburden GPs with calls such as this that can easily be done, through an administration service somewhere else. Once again, if the employee is well enough, they can work from home, and they don't need an isolation note if they're working from home. So again, so you can check if someone's been issued with a self-isolation note. The employer wants to check that. There is a link there that you can copy onto your browser, and you can go into the NHS website and check if an isolation note's been issued. So to check that though, you'd need the 16-digit reference number that will be on an isolation note and the employee's date of birth. Okay. So the government advice, well, first of all, you should be aware that, all of the systems that are being put in place just now by government are subject to little blips here and there. Perhaps a system might not be up to date when you check it. So I would just be aware of that and not be too heavy-handed with anybody that hasn't got a self-isolation note. You should really give a bit of leeway. And the government advice is to use your discretion around the need for medical evidence for anyone that's been told to self-isolate. So as much as there is a facility there to check, at the same time, as with everything else that's happened throughout this pandemic, is employers and employees have all needed to expect and hoped for a bit of flexibility. So that's the system in place at the moment, and I thought it would really be quite useful for everyone to be aware of that, and especially moving forward, as I said, because there are so many areas that can cause your employees distress and difficulties that, it's important to look to the future and start preparing for a bit, have the knowledge that you need to manage things as you go forward. So I thought, again, this presentation was I was trying to aim in the middle for micro employees and or companies that maybe only have 5 or 6 employees. Some employers will use a code to classify absence already, but in the circumstance just now where under the terms of the SSP rebate scheme, you're going to have dates and the reasons for why the person was paid the SSP. So I suggested coding something like I've got there on the screen. So a code 1 would be sick leave for someone with COVID symptoms, and a code 2 would be sick leave for someone that, you know, if they're living with someone that has symptoms, and then the other one, sick leave shielding. In terms of shielding, you know, people that have been told to shield in Scotland will find out between the middle and the end of June what the change is going to be for them. So that's another key area that people need to be thinking about. And I thought I would just put on there then, you must keep the following records for 3 years after the date you receive the payment for the claim, the dates the employee was off sick, the qualifying days beginning from day 1 of absence. So everyone knows normally for statutory sick pay that the first 3 days would be unpaid. During the coronavirus pandemic, the government agreed that people wouldn't have to wait, they would get paid from day 1. So the reason why the employee said they were off work, so if they had symptoms, someone in you with symptoms of shielding, you've got to keep a record of that. So that's why I said it might be a good idea to actually code them so that it's a sort of an easy reference point. And you would need the employee's national insurance number. So that's really just covering as much as is out there at the minute about the actual SSP rebate scheme. And if anyone has any questions about that, we can have a look at the end. I've got some more information here that's pretty lengthy. So I just thought I would just go over health, wellbeing and sickness absence management within a company. So ordinarily then, a policy would to set out and explain to the employees what the company policy is and what's to be done or followed in the event of a period of absence from work due to illness. The procedure is the step-by-step process, which is usually set out in the document, which explains what steps should be taken and when they might be taken. And management of absences is the responsibility of management. So it's important that this is understood by managers, particularly now as we move into this next phase that's going to be risky for employers in terms of health and safety. Managers really need to know that they are and they take control of managing absence, making sure they follow the policy and do what they should and support employees as much as they can. They must lead and implement the policies. There's no point in having a policy if managers don't buy into it, take ownership of it and apply it. And then the employee's responsibility is to follow the policies and procedures that they've been informed of, when they should call in, send a fit note in, etc. So it might be that in terms of the isolation notes that you have to pull together a little procedure or an instruction for employees to let them know what they should do when they get the isolation note and how they get it. And then the data recording and analysis, so information to your employee health and wellbeing is classified as sensitive data, and you must make sure data protection principles are applied at all times. That's just a reminder, that's another pitfall or area that you might incur some risk. So normally, some small companies don't have a full range of policies. They're, you know, getting by with the contract and whatever's in the contract. So if you don't have a policy, there is lots of guidance out there about what the minimum that you should have in the policy. So it should include how to report absences, including who the employee should contact and when the employee needs to get a sick note, i.e. after 7 days, when return to work discussions will be held and with whom, how and when to keep in touch, how the employer keeps track of absence and if they set any review or trigger points for absence, and whether the employer provides occupational health or an employee assistance programme and when this starts. So according to ACAS, that is the actual minimum that a policy should include. So depending on the size of your organisation, you can have global big organisations that have absence policies that go into hundreds of pages, down to having an absence policy that just has a couple of pages, depending on the size of the company and the type of employees, etc. Okay, and the other thing, of course, that should be known is how much the employee will be paid and for how long. So if you don't have a policy, I would recommend that you do get an absence policy, and that should be the minimum information that should be contained in there. Now, a lot of companies, as I said, do have some absence management process in their contracts of employment, especially if they're old ones. And if they are, then you need to just double check that they comply with ACAS Code of Practice. Okay, so just quickly then, a return to work meetings. How are we doing for time? Because my clock has disappeared on the laptop.
Okay. Yeah, we're just about there, I think.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if we can
Okay.
just wrap up, I think it would be great.
Okay. So lastly then, a return to work meeting then. So if you have someone that has had some time off, the return to work meeting is probably the most important part of the absence management process, and I can't emphasise this enough. So, for instance, if you were to look at an employee that's been off for 2 weeks and the GP has diagnosed stress-related illness, what information would you need from them to ensure a safe, supportive return to work? How will you get the information if you don't have a return to work meeting? And probably consider what you would need to inform the employee of at a return to work meeting. But it's absolutely essential, if you've got a policy and it specifies return to work meetings, that they are done the first day the person comes back to work, as close to the beginning of their shift as possible. So the return to work meeting, I'm just going to probably skip that, Damon, if we get enough time to.
We can provide this to people as a follow-up to this, so probably an idea to...
It's just probably the same principles as chairing more type of meetings, just a step-by-step things for you to consider. And then at the end there then, again, good practice for holding the meeting. Sorry, it didn't take as long as this. It didn't take as long as this when I was practicing. And then just some further reading for you if you want to find some other information. The one that I would point out is the Access to Work Counselling Service, which is a free service. If you don't have an employee assistance programme, then that is a free service available to anyone that's in work. Okay, and that's me. Thank you very much. Okay. So, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Anne. Very comprehensive and some really important points to consider there. And we will share that document with all you guys as well, because I think as both John and Anne have outlined there, I guess the key thing is both of them have mentioned sort of, I guess risk. And this is a whole new sort of area that we're in. You know, if someone was to, you know, I think both have reiterated the to try and keep yourself watertight, because that's where, you know, if there's, I think, did you say 50 million, John, for the health and safety executive? You know, that sounds quite serious to me. So if you know, businesses are seen not to be doing everything they can and following these fairly strict or comprehensive sort of guidelines, that's where you can get really tripped up, and it can give you some fairly you know, big issues to have to deal with. Before I forget, and sorry about this, John, but obviously the chamber, we have to accept that the chambers have got a relationship with British Chambers of Commerce that gives us access to hundreds of HR and legal documents for employment law. I know Natasha's used those a lot in the past, and they add a huge amount of value, probably running to thousands of pounds in terms of the benefits that you get through the chambers. So Laura, if you do want access to very cheap documentation, we have members from all over the country, not just Dunbartonshire. So do feel free. So at that point, I guess if there are any questions, because we, you know, Laura, I think you were looking at sort of maybe some of the operational things as well. So maybe start with you. Have you got anything that you wanted to raise?
No, I mean it all makes sense. I think the absence isn't really something that concerns us at the moment, as we've been able to get people to work remotely. We've been very kind of fortunate. We have had to furlough a number of people, but for the people working, they've all kind of been soldiering through it, and just doing what was needed to keep the company going. So we've been fortunate on that side. But it's good to know, and it kind of opened my eyes on a different element of it.
Yep. Yeah, well, it's one to bear in mind, you know, for, you know, as because this is going to last, you know, a while yet. So it's not just, you know, having people working. This is just an initial phase. We will be working more closely together, and the COVID-19 will still be there. So it is about, you know, looking at managing absence at that point. Natasha, how about you? How was that? You know, this is really relevant for you, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. You know, John as well as Anne. It's great. These meetings are just imperative, really. And we're at the stage at the moment where we're doing like a soft start because we're in the construction industry, and you know, we're doing fabrication manufacturing to like hospitals and you know, new builds and things like that. So we've been following the guidance of our health and safety advisor, and he's come in and demarcated all the factory and all the sanitising units, and just changed everything, changed the whole layout, in a sense, just to make sure it's safe for employees to come back. And as I said, we are not going to be bringing everyone back at the same time, just one or two people who will still be following some of the staff that can work from home, you know. But as I say, the factory workers can't, and we have been given, you know, within the next couple of weeks, they can go ahead to start bringing some of our staff back, which, you know, as you said, the construction is one of the first, and people are keen, especially if it's for, you know, end clients that we will need you there to do stuff. You know, we were, during the major pandemic, Gary and I were making flashes for the SEC. So our manufacturing is a bit different than some at the moment. But it's obviously, I'm going on to Anne. I didn't actually realise anything to do with the sick notes and all the rest of it. So that's great. We do have an absent policy, and we have implemented like return to work meetings and all the rest of it. So the one question I do have is, if you know, like the testing, the people are having to self-isolate for 2 weeks if they have got symptoms, do you still have to do like a return to work meeting even if it's only the 2 weeks?
I would still do the return to work meeting, yeah. So this may be an interesting, this is a thing that I've been mulling over, so John might be able to help with this as well. So for instance, if you've got a policy and there is a return to work process, I would still do the return to work meeting anyway, but in terms of that absence counting towards absence trigger points, I would tend to not include it.
Right.
So what's your thoughts on that, John?
I agree, Anne. I do. I think to pick up on the point that you make, we always encourage, you'll never solve an issue till you start managing an issue. And we used to use this old adage that lateness that becomes, you know, consistently lateness becomes consistent general absence and then consistent absence. So you have to kind of nip it in the bud. I think as an employer, Natasha, you have to be seen to be equal and unilateral. So I may have someone who is off once in a lifetime, but I would want to do a return to work interview, because that allows me to manage the people that are the errant sinners that are off regularly, to try and manage that process. I think it would be prudent to do a return. I think we would do a return to work interview. Essentially, someone's been off with symptoms, whether they've been self-isolating or even shielding, because from a health and safety perspective, you need to ensure that they are fit to return to work, and they're not coming back into the workplace because they need to come back into the workplace. They feel that they have to get back to work. You need to know that they've got the all clear as well. So,
no, I think it's great, and I didn't know anything about the isolation notes. So you can actually, they can get that from NHS. So that's completely new, and that's great, because that's like
yeah. Sorry, that was only introduced last week. So I was changing this at the last minute, and I was thinking, well, that would probably be more valuable for people to know that than to know this. So,
yeah, because you do want to obviously keep the rest of your staff safe. Well, now, if someone has symptoms and they've already started back at work, this is a problem I have, and they've came back to work for a few days, and they're working alongside people but still keeping the 2 metre rule. Everyone has their own separate offices, apart from Gary and I, who are absolutely working together, living together, we're husband and wife. Do we have to inform the rest of our employees, and how does that work if they've been in touch or they've been sharing the same factory?
You have to inform anyone that comes within general or reasonable distance of that individual. You have to, if they're potentially exposed to it. If you are aware of it, Natasha, you have to share that information to all the relevant people within that circle.
What we were advised is if obviously it's like the one-way system corridor, when you're not actually at your desk, they wear masks.
Yeah.
Entering, there's no more fingerprint machine and all the rest of it, so there's no sharing, touching or anything like that.
Yeah, and simple things like door handles and handrails, that could potentially be a carrier of, or the virus could lie on and lay on for anything up to say 9 days. So certainly looking, I spoke to a business this morning. We got our cleaners in twice a week, and they said we'll probably be looking to get them in every day, a little bit extra. I said that's a part of a living risk assessment. That's you're doing a living risk assessment. Could I was just going to, sorry, Natasha, if you don't mind, and it just came to my mind this morning, and I thought, well, I'd maybe share it. And it's more of an HR, and if you don't mind me just talking about this.
Okay.
We were talking as the furlough scheme will end at the end of October, and currently up until the end of July, then you can claim 80%, and you can top up or not. But from August, it will reduce by 10% incrementally in September. In August, if I expect people to come back to work partially or otherwise, then they will expect to come back to work for the wages for which they are contractually entitled to. So employers in that situation where they'll have to look at what we're talking to companies about now is if you don't have it, is get layoff policies and redundancy procedures or clauses within your contracts, because we don't know what the future will hold. And if you are going to have to vary people's terms, you should ideally have a right to vary term in the contract. But if not, you're going to have to get their agreement on that. And I can get your agreement on it, but I've got to go through the correct process, because if I don't do it correctly, as Anne will agree, Anne will say it's tantamount to breach of contract and constructive dismissal. So people will come back to work. On what terms they come back, the contracts will have to vary to reflect that.
Yes, we'll have to vary the contracts then. And what about the partial, when does the partial furlough and coming back part-time?
1st of July. So
July, right, okay.
So for instance, I've got you on a 5-day week. I can bring someone back for 2 days. I have to pay you for 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, but for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I claim for furlough. Okay.
Right. Okay.
A couple of other things, if you don't mind, Damon, if I can. We talk a lot about holidays, and employers have the right, and spoke about the carry forward for up to 2 years. But there are a lot of employers that the future is the future. It could be 3, 5, 6 months away, is really unknown territory. Employers have a right just now to enforce holidays. Because what I don't want is, if I want everyone back in the 1st of September, and a little bit of jocular humour here, but 1st of September I expect everyone back, and everyone's nipped off to Mallorca for a fortnight with all this unused holiday, and I've got an order book that needs attended to. So we're speaking to employers while staff are on furlough, is take the opportunity to apply the holidays. You have to give them notice adequate. There's notice provision, and you have to top up the difference.
That's a really good point. John, thanks.
I just say something to Natasha as well. It's just about the things that she was asking about. So it sounds as if you've had some health and safety advice, but already. Yeah. So, for instance, the companies that I'm working with, although in Scotland we might not see, well, for instance, an office-based company, we might not see a return to work for them until August, but all the risk assessments are done already. We've done them already, just to make sure. And as John said, it's a living document. It's going to be revised every week. It took a long time. Took a long time to actually get it all in place, but that's there now, and that's, it's a really good guide to keep you on the straight and narrow.
No, absolutely. I will definitely take on board some of the things you've given me, Anne. That's amazing. As I said, we use this company called Project Health and Safety. We've been using them quite a few years. They've got us through lots of quality, Construction Line Gold membership. They've really taken us on to the next kind of ISO level next year, hopefully. But yeah, we do have a COVID-19 management plan and structure in place, and we've been, obviously, because we have been doing a bit of work here and there, we might be a few weeks, month further ahead than some other companies. But yeah, it's always great to come on here and find these new items that I wasn't aware of either. That's really helpful.
Okay. And I just had one final point about, and this is pressure that we spoke about this morning, and there will be companies who have to come out of this situation will have to consider redundancies. There's no other way to look at this. They'll have to go through the proper process, so they'll have to have a business case. They'll have to consult, issue the at-risk letters, have the meetings, and then ultimately, I'm simplifying this, but ultimately then we'll probably look at deciding on which posts and positions that people will leave the organisation. The consideration is that if people are on notice, that you can use the furlough process to pay the redundancy notice, not the payment. So the redundancy notice. So the notice period is 1 week for every completed year. So not the redundancy payment, but the redundancy notice can be funded out of the furlough process.
All right, okay. That's interesting.
It's really another really valuable point, I think.
I know. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be lots of companies coming out of this not being able to survive and not being able to work with the level of staff they have as well. So, I mean, that's another problem that we do have with regards to, which I noticed in the last few months, tribunals. Employees, the drop of a hat taking you to a tribunal, and it's okay for them because it doesn't cost them any money. There's one particular one where he ended up dropping it at the last minute, but it was still costing us £2,000 to £3,000 for a solicitor to manage and things. And that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about if, for instance, you tell your staff, listen, there's no requirements for you now, because of the post-pandemic, we're going to have a whole load of tribunals at the end of it.
Yeah, we know for a fact, we represent clients in tribunal. It's part of what we do. It's at the end of our conveyor belt. I was speaking to James Potts, our head of legal services, this morning, and already we've started to reopen our offices, head office in Manchester and others. But what we will be doing is embarking on moving certain staff within the business who are on the advice side over to the legal side, and probably looking to staff up, because we anticipate that next year takes about 9 months for a tribunal for conception to hearing. That's assuming it runs a full course. But we think probably from spring of next year, Natasha, and for about a 2-year period thereafter, tribunal claims will soar. They will soar because of what has happened in this period. So it's important that you've got to be absolutely on the money with your procedures. You've got to be absolutely airtight in what you do.
No, and that's true. I do have you on speed dial, John. So no doubt we will be contacting you when all this comes out, you know.
Very good. And I think Anne was going to make a point as well.
It was just something that I meant to say earlier when we were talking about risk assessment, and that is, so where you are a company that own the premises, if you, for instance, have appointed a cleaning contractor, if there's a COVID case on the premises, there is actually specific cleaning procedures that have got to be taken. And those are detailed on the UK government website. So you'd have your standard cleaning every day, but if there's a case, then there is actually set out procedures that they should follow. Okay.
Right. Yes. We've got a professional cleaner that comes in once a week, and she's doing deep cleaning. Has been doing that weekly for the last 3-4 weeks now. Yeah. So yes, but we also have a receptionist that cleans down all the metal surfaces, handles, doors every 3 hours. Yeah. So yeah, but I had to look at that. So it's all scary. It's all new, isn't it?
And I think, just to reiterate what John was saying, it's just about getting, sort of drilling down some of this level of detail to make sure you're watertight, so that something like a tribunal doesn't become a nightmare for you, because if you're armed with all these, go through sort of proper procedures, you're covering yourself for all these things. So that's the value of these things, and I'm delighted that we're having information that's coming hot off the press, really, because that's the whole point of Together for Business. And I think there's some really sort of valid and strong points being made there as well. And I'll just feed in as well in terms of a session this week was talking about how they, just going to what John was saying about agreeing or I guess you can dictate the annual leave, but a lot of businesses, again going back to a lot of our planning sessions, are looking at the impact on the business and going, thinking, right, okay, we're all right up to January, February, March, so we're going to stagger all our annual leave. And I think the other point I was going to make was communication with staff. So try not to make it, because I think that's come up a lot in these sessions, particularly with when we've got employment lawyers. It's the communication with your staff to take them through everything, and hopefully with you, rather than butting up against them. And so to say, I think this example he had was explaining very clearly that the company's gone through a difficult time, as you can imagine. The way that we'll keep your jobs and keep it sustainable is if you can help us by taking your annual leave at these times. And I think all the employees were on board for assisting with that and being flexible, because they knew it was in their interests, sort of thing. So there's some really valid points there that a lot of businesses are taking on board. So that's fantastic. I'm just aware of time and people getting on. So I think Laura putting a hand up there.
Sorry, I just have a quick question, because it was my understanding when for staff that has been furloughed, they don't actually accrue holidays during this time. Is that correct?
No, they do accrue annual leave, Laura, during the furlough periods. Yeah. Contractual, yes.
I think you can. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been through this many sessions, but whilst they're furloughed, you can get them to, or maybe not, you can't get them to be furloughed during annual leave, but you could, have them taking annual leave instead of being furloughed. Is that right?
So some of my staff they're on a 6 months contract, which actually their contract for some of them running out in August. And so some of them wanted to know they could potentially take holidays afterwards while they haven't actually been working and accruing it. And our HR person, I think, mentioned they weren't accruing holidays. So I'm just kind of trying to get my head around it.
So my thoughts would be that they accrue holidays for the 6 months, and if they wanted to take the holiday at any point during the 6 months of employment, then they are entitled to full holiday pay for the period that they take holidays. Okay.
John, do you want to?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Laura. They accrue holidays in line with the pro rata accrual, and how they take, whether they take that in time or whether it's paid after they leave. I had a meeting, a virtual meeting with a football club this week, a senior club, and so they have staff who are on fixed term contracts, and the rule of is you're probably aware, but just while you mentioned that, once fixed term contracts come to an end, then employers are not being encouraged to re-employ and put these people back on furlough. You'll know that. That's the end of it. Because at the end of the day, the furlough scheme is a burden on the taxpayer. Yeah. And Anne was speaking about keeping records on SSP for up to 3 years. And you're probably aware of this, but this whole process, the furloughing process and the records you keep, should be maintained for up to 5 years for inspection. So, and you never know the day, Laura, when they chap your door. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite lucky. I don't work in HR. I'm just kind of a manager of a team. So, but yeah, I don't envy her job. But no, that's very good to know. Thank you.
Thanks. Russell, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I'm sure am I understanding what John said there, though, that if somebody's can be on furlough, if you're on a 6-month contract, say it's ending at the end of August, and they've accrued 2 weeks holiday entitlement during that time, though, you could furlough somebody up. You give them their requisite notice that the contract ends at the end of August, and their furlough, you pay them. They were entitled to only entitled at 80% up to the end, but the last 2 weeks are treated as their holiday, and they have to receive full pay for those last 2 weeks as their holiday pay. So I think essentially they're well, it's probably still, I don't know whether it's still treated as furlough or holiday, but you would obviously want the 80% to try and cover the full time. But you technically, when you notify them that their contract ends at the end of August, and then you would tell them that these 2 weeks are their holiday pay and they get paid full amount.
Yeah.
Not the 80%. Yeah.
No,
so you don't have to pay them after you don't have to pay them extra after the contract ends, but you have to make sure you give them the notice in the right time beforehand and tell them what's furlough and that they're when the holiday period applies. Yeah.
And just ensure you articulate that to them and keep that record in writing that those last 2 weeks would be holiday, would be classed as holiday. So therefore it'd be holiday pay, and they would then be entitled to 100% of their daily weekly rate or salary equivalent.
Which is slightly complicated, and as that's based on their previous number of weeks average. So is that based on furlough 80% or their normal full pay, and what before the furloughing, what they would have normally got in bonuses and overtime, whatever? That's kind of.
It depends what you want. It depends what you want to achieve, Russell.
Yeah, just every time you think about something, you think, well, actually, never. There's always other complications, but yeah. I think with most people, I think if my philosophy has always been, as you speak to people and you're reasonable. Obviously, folk who are not being the contract's extended and they're worried about what's going to happen to them after that, they'll want every penny they're entitled to. And I think sometimes erring on the side of generosity is better than as Natasha suggested earlier on, ending up in some dispute over it. If it's the case of, for the sake of 70 quid or 150 quid or whatever it is, then pay what but speak to people and agree and let them know. And I think just being open and honest and upfront is always the best policy whenever you're dealing with anybody.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, unless there's any more, that was a really positive session, and you know, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and contributing, but also especially to two extremely knowledgeable presenters today. And again, thank you so much for your support as part of the Together for Business activity.
Thank you.
Right, guys, that's it. Thanks very much. See you later.
Bye bye.